Hello, I'm Anthony. One of the things I don't cover very much on this channel, because I'm pretty bad at it, is playing piano. I am not a performance musician. I use what very minimal skills I've got to get the information down and then turn it into a polished product later in Cubase. That's the process I'm going to show you today. What I've got here is a piece of music played in by me completely live. Played a couple of chords and thought they sound quite nice and just pressed record without even thinking about it. I had no song structure, absolutely nothing, no click track. I just pressed record and played for a while. This raw data on its own is absolutely not good enough to make a song out of, but all of the steps that I'm going to show you today get you to the point where it actually sounds pretty good. First, I'll play you the exposed underbelly of the thing itself. This is what it started out as. So I'm literally, you can see the brain just kind of stalling. Now it's like, well, what chord am I going to play next? This is the advantage of not having a click track. You can just work things out in real time, and it's really all about what the notes are going to be. I've obviously concluded that that little run up there was terrible, and so I've just taken my hands off the keyboard for a moment and thought, well, that first chord sounded good. Let's try it again. So now I'm just trying variations of that thing, and you can hear over the course of this 4 minutes, I won't play the entire thing, I'm just chatting over the top of it because there's interesting stuff to pick out of this. New chord. Okay, so I'm coming up with ideas that are going to work. Oh, that was pretty bad. Now I'm trying to be a little bit more fluent, I suppose. But it's really all just very dynamic, very organic, and completely useless. None of that's in time. There's fluff notes all over the place. This thing needs to be turned into something polished. So now we move up to the next track, the one that's currently muted. This is where I'm up to at the moment with this piece of music. This is what it sounds like right now. I'm using Cubase and the tools inside Cubase to make this thing sound like it was played by an actual pianist who knows what they're doing, rather than me, who is none of those things. So let's go through some of those steps one by one. The first thing I needed to do was get the timing right. Now I've chosen a static BPM for this piece of music, and ultimately that might change, but for the time being it is still static. I picked 74 BPM, which is significantly faster than was originally played. But obviously when I originally played it, that's brain movement speed. That's just basically how fast my brain is working out one chord to the next. It's not necessarily how fast I want the piece of music to be. And so I've selected a BPM simply by, just doing a kind of tap thing. You can download a simple app on your phone, which I actually find the best way. Just tap your phone and then you think, right, 74 BPM sounds about right. Once I had the tempo worked out, I would go back to the original piece, listen to those chords, practice them a little bit on the keyboard first, and get somewhere near actually playing the thing in properly. So this has been played in live, basically over the top of the piece of music that I'd written underneath. So the way that I would have done this would be to pick the original track up, put it underneath, and see what the notes are, practice them. This thing's in C minor, so I basically just kind of wander around on the keyboard, figuring out how I'm going to play this thing. And just a quick note as far as the C minor thing's concerned, I very often switch to using Scalar. So up at the top of the program, I've got this application called Scalar 2, which is a key mapping tool. What it basically does is maps all of the keys to the white notes. So if I root this track, instead of taking the input from my keyboard, with a little bit of fancy monitoring and routing, send it to Scalar instead. Now I play the white keys on the keyboard and play the scale of C minor. So it makes it really easy to play all white keys. I don't have to think about black keys or what the structure of the scale is. Really easy for a noddy piano player like me to play stuff in live. This only works right at the very beginning of the process, because once you've recorded some notes, that white key mapping becomes more trouble than it's worth. But right at the very beginning, it is useful. And as you can see at this point, I've switched back to standard keyboard control so that I now have to play the black keys if I want C minor. So I've picked up all of these notes, I've learned how to play it. All of that is relatively straightforward and nothing fancy at all. But the next odd thing to note is that most of these notes are 1/32 in length. That's because I'm using sustain pedal points, and this is really important. If you're going to get a decent sounding piano line up and running, you've got to get your sustain pedal skills up to speed. Basically, every time you change chord, you want to release the sustain pedal just before the end of the last chord, and then make sure that it's active while the notes of the next chord are playing. So each of these 3 notes that I've highlighted here will ring out until the release of the sustain pedal all the way over here. Of course, in the C2, it's going to get overridden by the note of the same pitch. Most pianos won't double up the same note played twice, but the D sharp and the G2 will extend right towards the end, right to the end of this sustain point. What you then get is these very short notes. They're actually extended this far, all the way up to the point where sustain basically cuts off. So you get that natural feeling of the human being releasing the sustain pedal and then pressing the note. And this gap here is absolutely essential to maintain that sense of live feel. So you do want a gap. That's the breath, and then come back. Let's see what that sounds like. So that breath there was this chord being paused momentarily and then replayed. Exactly the same chord is replayed. Then I'll do the live playing test. I'll try and play that phrase. So I've got 4 notes here that you can't see them on the keyboard, but I'm playing the first 4 notes of that original chord. And then I'm going to come down from the D3 to play C. So those 2 notes are actually sounding together, but it sounds fine. And then I'm releasing the lower 3 notes of the chord and then playing that C, D sharp and G simultaneously while the upper C is ringing out. I'm basically physically replicating all of the notes in that little phrase to see if it can be played naturally. And it can. So I've recreated something that can be physically played and sounds right. And when you introduce the sustain pedal as well, you get a totally natural sounding phrase. Another nice trick to make a piano line sound natural is to have these extended overlapping notes. So we've got quite a lot of sustain pedal action going on here as I'm stepping down through the bass notes. I don't want all of those bass notes, the D and then the C and then the A sharp, to all ring out. It's going to be cacophonous. So I need to lift my sustain pedal for each one of those. But this middle G, I'm allowing to ring out through that phrase over this sustain pedal point. So we're going to get this. That G2 in the middle just provides that kind of anchor. The note stretches out longer than it would if I'd basically made it shorter, which means it would cut off at this sustain point and you'd have no G in this middle zone. There's a big kind of spectral gap in the middle. You know, that's too big a jump to get between these 2 C's. I want something in the middle filling out the frequency. We've also got this legato line up at the top. Let's have a look at these notes at the top of the line. That's basically the primary melody being played by the piano. So at any given time, what do I want to accentuate? What are the most important notes of the phrase? Now, when I play that naturally, I'm playing it legato. So those notes are continuous, they're seamless. So I've got sustain pedal points to worry about. If I just had all of these notes running at 32nd, fine, they would sustain up to the sustain point, but then there's going to be gaps. I don't want gaps. I want it to be played legato. So the pattern we're developing here is use standard methods, sustain pedal being really important. Then you can make all of your notes 30 seconds and sustain pedal is going to take care of the vast majority of it. Then override that information. Don't just rely on that to play your entire song. It's going to sound like a computer's spewing it out. You need to extend notes in between and smooth everything out. Anything that needs to be either legato or explicitly extended, as in the case of these long notes, do that. Do whatever's going to make it sound as natural as possible. Then we've got dynamics. When the original thing was played in, there were no dynamics of any significant quality. I was literally just struggling to get the notes played. And yet in this phrase, you can see the C and the D upper in the upper aspect of the melody. They're louder, they're pushing that melody forwards, and we have this swell and then fall back again. So the phrase isn't all being repeated at military precise velocity. I've got that dynamic quality in there as well. I'm actually finishing off with quite a gentle fall on that last chord. I'm just pulling it back so that it's not really kind of smacking you in the face. Another thing to concern yourself with as far as velocity is concerned is how you handle chords. So let's listen to just this opening chord all on its own. You might think all of those notes have identical velocities. They're all purple. In fact, they don't. The C2 is the quietest note at 49, and then the notes get louder, 52, 54, 56, all the way up. I have a very simple logical edit process set up to do that. What I do is select all of the notes, open my logical editor, and then I have a fixed velocity algorithm here, basically just set all of my selected notes to exactly, in this case I've said 50. Let's say apply. So these notes are now all exactly 50. What I'll then do is, if I want to swell, I want to accentuate the treble notes, want to make the treble notes louder, I'll select fewer and fewer notes as I go up. So you can see I've selected the top 3 notes here. And then in my velocity bar, I just pick that up and let's say make it 52. And then select the top 2 notes, make them 54, and then just the top note. So now I've got a very slightly accentuated upper frequency range, and the chord just sounds a little bit more natural than everything being played with absolutely identical velocity. I don't do that everywhere. You don't want to do anything everywhere. Use lots of different techniques to basically feel, how do you play? You know, when you're playing the piano, how do you play? Well, very often you'll play the treble notes slightly louder than the bass notes, and that's just something I'm picking on there. What I don't really want to do is have all of those notes definitively different velocities, because that's exceptionally difficult to do as a human being, to play some notes louder than others. When you play a chord, you know, your hands come down and everything is operating pretty equally. It's okay to do linear scales in one direction or another, that's going to work. Anything fancier than that, it's really not how humans play. That's not a rule I follow everywhere though. This G2 in the middle of this phrase is actually the loudest of the 3 notes at 5.4. That's because I specifically want to emphasize that note. And that gets us on to talking about accent notes. I'm going to choose a different phrase now so that we don't lose our mind listening to the same thing over and over again. I'm going to pick this 2-bar section. Listen to this phrase once through, and then I'll point something out and we'll listen to it again. Here's the phrase. What I actually want to live there is kind of a little musical Easter egg, because the repeating C becomes sort of hypnotic. There's a drone effect going on there. And in fact, these Cs are all louder than they would otherwise normally be in their kind of place in the piece. I want to get this bang, bang sort of drone effect going on. So now just listen to those Cs. I'll let the phrase run a couple of times and you'll start to feel it kind of being a little bit hypnotic. So that's picking out specific accented notes that are going to perform a particular musical idea. The beauty of the piano is that it's very often doing multiple things simultaneously, and it's up to the musician to pick out which of the notes are the most important. It doesn't have to be rammed down your throat. I'm not saying that any of this should be done over the top, but just by making those notes a little bit louder. What velocity did I pick for those? So 62 is, I mean, a lot of this high melody, I wanted a little bit of kind of dramatic upswelling in this phrase anyway, but those C's are really kind of hammering out. And when your brain latches onto them, suddenly it becomes something really interesting to hang off. If you're going to do a hypnotic thing, you've got to do it consistently. I couldn't move any of these notes. In fact, originally this third note was here and it sounded like this. So I've got a more interesting melody up top, the dee 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 dee, but then I lost that hypnotic thing. And once I focused in on these two notes, I decided that I wanted that to be the repeating refrain, then the piece of music kind of bends to my will. And this is, it's constantly evolving. It now doesn't sound very much like the original thing that was played. That was just a starting point. Let's move on to the next couple of bars to show you the next idea that I'm throwing at you. This is internal melody. And again, you can see me using legato. I really want to pick out the melody. I'll play this phrase and then kind of decide for yourself what you think the internal melody is. Yeah, it's not very difficult, is it? It's all the upper notes. So if we just listen to the upper notes on their own, I can very easily imagine that's what I ask the singer to sing. That feels like it's the main melody. Maybe a little bit of counterpoint in there somewhere, but I'm really kind of picking those out. And can you see how particularly the F, G and G sharp in this phrase, they're louder than the surrounding notes, just to accentuate that kind of melodic nature of the thing. I'm also giving this chord at the beginning of the phrase quite a smack. Most of those notes are louder than other surrounding stuff. That high energy has come from the previous phrase and now I'm pulling it back. So I want the whole thing to be constantly breathing and dynamic. Listen to large sections of it, 30 seconds, a minute long, and feel how it flows, whether or not stuff needs to be pulled back or accentuated. Practically every one of these notes in this piece at this point has been individually manipulated to make it feel and sound right in the piece. So I'm really pulling back on that second chord. And again, at the end, I'm really being as restrained as possible, not sustained, restrained in the playing of this chord. After we have a bit of an upswell and then it kind of pulls back again. You can also see this phrase is also a good example of not being afraid to let the sustain pedal run. That's actually running quite a long time. So when you think about it, every one of those notes is actually ringing simultaneously, even the G sharp and the G, which are technically dissonant. I don't think they sound dissonant, and so I've let the sustain pedal point run past this. Ordinarily, I would cut it short to stop the G and the G2 ringing together, but it sounds good, so I've left it. If I just quickly put a pedal point in there, so now I'd have to extend all of these notes, wouldn't I? This might work. I'm not saying it won't. One more try. Maybe that is better. Live songwriting. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to leave that. It's really subtle because the G sharp 2 isn't playing particularly loud. And by the time the G comes in, it's kind of overriding it. But technically, they are dissonant. And now that I've focused in on that exact phrase and those two notes together, I've decided that I actually don't want them to play together. And so I've bent the rest of the song around it. You can see I want everything else to extend. So I've arbitrarily made those notes longer. So now the last trick I'm going to talk about today is the positioning of each of these notes. If I single click any individual note and you have a look at its start position, it's not on the bar. Now this is really quite difficult to do artificially because a human being will play with such emotion and pull back and just basically stretch that tempo a little bit. When you're working primarily in a DAW, like the key editor here, that's really difficult to do. And manually moving every one of these notes is super, super hard. So a lovely trick that I like to use to accomplish something that works really, really well is to use a hi-hat line. So here I've got a Groove Agent drum rhythm. It's deliberately really simple, but that hi-hat line has just got a really nice feel to it. It's not military precise, it's not exactly on the beat, but it's just giving me a nice sense of kind of organic flow, and we can make a groove quantize out of this line. The way to do it is, basically this is the same drum beat repeated many times, so I'll just pick one right at the end of the piece. What you want to do is pick a 4-bar section that will work perfectly well. Select everything that isn't a hat, delete them. Now we've basically got a groove quantize pattern. If you go into your quantize panel, see this center section with all of these green lines, you can drag a MIDI part onto that. So if I pick this MIDI part up and drag it onto the quantize setting, drop audio event or MIDI part. I do that. Now it's created a new groove using exactly that pattern. Now I've already done it and I've saved it as Rainy Weekend Groove. So when I select that groove, I've now got this 4-bar organic pattern played with these live hats that I can then use to apply to my music. So back to the piano line. I'm not going to go into all of the intricacies of the quantize panel today, but most of these settings are important. Original position needs to be turned on. Rough, I've put a tiny little bit of extra variance, 2 ticks either way on my rough setting. I don't want soft quantize on, I want it to quantize to this grid. So if you select basically all of those options as is, and you head back up to your piano line. Now, when I press quantize, this entire thing, the entire piano line will be quantized to those hats. Now, they're not going to move anywhere because it's already been done, but that literally just quantized the entire pattern. There might have been a couple of things just moved then for one reason or another. But now, as you can see, all of these notes are very slightly ahead of or behind the beat, as determined by that underlying hat pattern. Play quite loud for that initial chord of the chorus. Little melody run, and then pull back everything nice and soft. Again, a louder chord at the beginning of the phrase. Legato melody. It's working really well. This is turning into a song that I think I'm going to really quite like, and it was just from a totally random, spontaneous 4-minute jam. Hope you found that useful. Please hit like if you did. I'll see you again. Thanks very much.